These submarks are like those little playful things that come in and really elevate your brand and really take your brand to that next level that sometimes you don't see.
Welcome back to Duo On Air. I'm Abby.
And I'm Courtney.
And we're the X agency turned entrepreneurial team that puts the duo in Duo Collective. Our boutique organic marketing agency specializes in SEO, social media strategy, and branding.
We're an everyday pair of business besties / marketing experts obsessed with helping our community learn more about what it takes to run a business.
Which is why on Duo On Air, we're not holding anything back. We're giving you all the info we know about how to grow your business organically so you can be the confident CEO you were made to be.
And how to navigate life as a small business owner.
Whether it's on your own or with your best friend by your side, so grab your coffee
or your mimosa, we don't judge,
and settle in for a quick value-packed episode of Marketing Tips.
Welcome back to the Duo On Air podcast. This is episode number 96, and today we are talking about a brand asset that a lot of our clients get a little bit confused about, and that is submarks. So on episode 44, we broke down all of the crazy brand jargon out there, like submarks, brand assets, collateral, all of that stuff. So tune into that to hear more, because today we're focusing just on this one. We're just going to talk about submarks today. So what is a submark? A submark logo, as the name suggests, is a less detailed version of your main logo, a submark. Get it? So it's just it's like a fun extension of your main logo, essentially. And we sometimes call them a quote unquote logo, like a submark logo, but it isn't meant to replace your main logo. It's meant to be something that adds a little bit more fun to your brand. So what are some of the benefits of having a submark? They give your brand consistency when your main logo can't fit in certain spaces. So think about your social space. Think about Instagram. You've got that tiny, tiny little profile pic, and sometimes your main logo just can't live in that space. It's not big enough. If you scaled your main logo down, you wouldn't be able to read it. So that is where fun submarks can take place of that space. And then they are so fun. Submarks are one of the funnest parts about building a brand. I feel like I say this about every element, but submarks and patterns are probably one of the funner things, because you get to break, like quote unquote, break some rules when it comes to your brand. And your main logo is nice and all, and it's like the one thing for your brand that you're kind of like, this is our brand, this is what we look like, and it kind of sets that tone. But these submarks are like those little playful things that come in and really elevate your brand and really take your brand to that next level that sometimes you don't see. So if you land on somebody's website and you see they got their main logo, their fonts, their colors, their photography, all of that, and that's where it stops, that can be a nice brand. But when you go to a website and you see a brand that has their main logo, their fonts, their colors, and then you see these fun patterns, or you see these fun marks kind of hanging out in different spaces and moving or twisting or wiggling, those are usually your submarks and or icons. And those are the things that really take your brand from good to great. It really adds to that brand story and really makes it super fun.
I also think from an SEO perspective too, like a lot of times we have to incorporate some kind of descriptor in our main logo. Like it's your main logo, and then underneath your name, you have like design and build, brewery, tap room, you have marketing agency, copywriter, web design. Like you have to do that little description of like, here's my business, here's what I do, to communicate that sometimes in your main logo. And your submarks can kind of be that fun place where you can bring in your taglines and like be more playful or be more descriptive. And I think that's like the cool part about submarks.
Or be like a little bit more edgy, like have a little bit more fun with it. It's almost like your main logo is like the professional logo of your branding. You're like, okay, well, main logo, you have to do a little bit heavier lifting. You're the professional one here. You got to like step up and like really look put together, where your submarks are kind of like, and we're like the party committee. Like we're here to have fun and be a little different and say different things and be a little quirky. And it's just a really fun add-on to your brand that can really just take it to this more playful level.
And before we go too crazy, let's talk a little bit about rules. Just setting some guidelines because going crazy and having fun makes a lot of sense with your brand. But if you go too crazy, that can show up as inconsistency and it can be confusing. So there definitely are still some rules you have to follow. So I'd say the first thing is to have fun, but don't go overboard. Your submarks need to still use the same colors, the same fonts, the same patterns. You can't just all of a sudden throw in a different font or throw in a different color or just throw polka dots in. Like doing random things like that can cause that inconsistency within your brand. So you have to stay within your brand guidelines and the elements or the brand assets, which is another jargony word that we break down in that episode too, which basically just means all the things that encompass your brand. It has to still come through in your submarks. So make sure that you follow all of those rules.
I would say too, be careful with how many submarks you have because we've even created brand boards before where I think sometimes clients are like, oh, submarks, this is really fun. I didn't realize that like we are going to add this into my brand. And then they want to go submark crazy. And you're like, okay, that's not the point of submarks. Submarks, you should have like a handful, maybe like probably no more than 5 really. And then use them strategically and playfully throughout your brand. But don't have 10 plus submarks just because you're like, oh, this is super fun and this is like a really cool extension of my brand. I want to have all of these submarks because then that's just going to get muddy. It could get confusing. And you could start to like break some of these rules that we're defining right now.
Yeah, I'd say have a purpose. Like if the submarks are just for fun, maybe a couple of those are fine, right? But beyond that, maybe you have a submark for your course or for like a different iteration that you have that lives within your brand. And that is absolutely okay. That's serving a purpose. You know when to use it and where to use it. But if you have 18 submarks that are all fun, all of a sudden it's like, what is going on here?
Yes, yes. So your submark, we kind of talked about this earlier, but it needs to complement your main logo. So it shouldn't feel like two completely different things. It should feel like your main logo had a baby, essentially, which we think is a funny way of saying it, but it should definitely still be consistent with your brand. Again, use those same colors, same fonts, same shapes. Like don't start introducing like a ton of different shapes or bringing in, sometimes we incorporate icons into submarks. Make sure you have, a set amount of icons and you don't go crazy within that space as well. So just making sure that it complements your logo. It's an extension of your brand. If somebody were to go from your social to your website to your newsletter and see these different submarks, it would still make sense with your brand because they can see that connection from your submark to your main logo.
I think another thing as a non-designer that I don't even think about, that I know you think about all the time too, is like, are you using like circles or squares? Like, I know this is still so simple, but I don't even think about that in terms of like, okay, you're using circles in all of these places, and all of a sudden you find a Canva template that's using squares. And Courtney's like, that doesn't fit. And I'm like, oh, you're right. Like, I don't even realize that that stuff is like so simple to drive consistency, but it's like noticing that stuff. So, like with your submarks, if all of a sudden you have some that are all different kinds of shapes, that is going to be confusing from a whole, like, take a 15,000 step back view.
Right, right. Yeah. So if I'm creating submarks for a client, I will never combine a oval with a circle because those are, they're similar, sure. But when you see them next to each other, they don't have any sort of balance. And you're kind of like, okay, is it an oval or is it a circle? Like which shape do they want here? So making sure like shapes too, when you think about those different shapes and where they might live and how you want them to like interact with your brand, you don't want to go shape overboard.
Yeah. And I think the final rule, we don't have too many rules because honestly, submarks are meant to be fun. Yes. But the final rule really is not to overuse it. There is a time and a place for your main logo, and your main logo should be more so for those people who are meeting you for the first time. They need to know you and be introduced to you and your brand. So you don't want to give them this crazy submark that they can't define what you are or who you are, even though they should be consistent, right? So like you see your main logo, you see your submarks, you get the consistency. It's the same brand. But there is a time and place for your main logo to exist. So making sure that you don't ignore your main logo because you love your submark so much.
Right, right. Like if you think, for instance, if somebody landed on your website and they saw submark first, and let's say your submark maybe had your brand name in it, but it also had a tagline. Or let's say it doesn't even have your brand name in it and it's just got like some fun taglines in it. If that's the first thing somebody sees, they might be confused because they're like, wait, like, I don't understand what this tagline means yet because I don't even know what this business is about yet because they haven't defined that with their main logo and visual. So just thinking through some of those things when you use those submarks.
I think this is the part people have the hardest part of, like, defining. Once they have all of their brand assets, once they have all of their submarks in hand, how do you use them? Like, say you're listening to this right now and you're like, I know I have some submarks and I never use them. So how can you use them? One of our favorite ways to use them is actually branded apparel and overall branded collateral. So these are likely people who already know you, right? They're receiving a resource that you've shared, or they are purchasing your apparel on your shop, or you're gifting them apparel as a giveaway, like things like that. They already know you. Using your submarks makes a lot of sense. And it can just be super fun. Like our tagline being like, let's duo this, like that on a hat. You better bet that we're going to add that to our rebrand.
Absolutely. Another one is the social media profile. So I kind of hit on this earlier, but however, if we always stress, if you are a duo like us or an individual, we always like to see your faces in your profile pic. It's just a little
for
bit
Instagram specifically.
For Instagram. Yeah. It's just a little bit more authentic, a little bit more personable. And I think people gravitate towards seeing your face if you have the opportunity. If you have a large team or something, obviously that's a little harder. So use one of those submarks. But if it's just you or you and a business partner, we always say use your face. But social is a really good space to use those submarks as your profile pic because those images are a lot smaller, so they scale a lot smaller, and therefore if you have, you know, maybe a little bit more context in your main logo with the name of your brand plus plus a tagline of like what you do, when you shrink that really, really small, you are not going to be able to read that tagline. Sometimes you're not even going to be able to read your brand name. So taking those submarks and really having them shine in these spaces is a lot nicer than trying to squeeze your tiny little logo in there.
Yeah. And on that note too, your social media highlights is also a really good spot for it, especially if you're using your submarks to be for like a course or an event or anything like that. That can be a really good spot to use your little submarks.
Also, in the social media space, if you have submarks, you can make them little GIFs and you can actually add them into your stories. So that's a whole, like, I think that blows people's minds sometimes. Like, what? I can make my own personalized branded GIFs in my stories. So that's something that we're going to explore with our rebrand. And we're really excited about it. But it just takes your brand again to that next level. Like if people are interacting with your stories and they're like, oh my gosh, they've got their branded elements in here, like doing a little spin or doing a little wiggle. It really just adds to your brand and makes the experience that much more exciting.
Let's how to that on YouTube.
Yeah.
Side note for us to remember. We need to
keep us accountable.
I know. Ask for it later. The next one is your website favicon. So that little circle that shows up on a Google search page, that is actually now, if you go to Google, and we've talked about this in episode 81, where we've talked about how the search engine experience is changing. Your circle and your brand name is bigger now than it's ever been before, because brand authority is actually really important from an SEO standpoint. So making sure you have a website favicon, it is favicon, right?
Yeah,
Every
favicon.
time I say that, I'm like, do I say that right?
I mean, unless I'm saying it wrong, but I always call it favicon.
That's what we like to call it. It sounds fun. But anyways, that is definitely something that you need to have some type of mark there, and using your submark there is perfect.
This one is super, super fun. And we also want to do this with our new rebrand is wallpaper in your office. So we've seen this with a couple of brand designers that we know out in the wild, and it is so much fun to like jump on a call with them and literally your brand is on the wall behind you. Like how cool is that? That is just like represented right there. It's a part of your interior space. It's very obviously unique to you and customizable. And it's just, again, a really fun thing to do. And I think it just like energizes you and gets you excited. Like you're living in your brand day in and day out, especially like in the digital space. Why not take it out of your computer and put it on things and surround yourself with your brand?
Yeah. A few other things which also fall under that kind of brand collateral bucket would be course content, like actually branding your slides if you have a digital course, business cards, like those. I know a lot of times we're always just using our phone to show people our Instagram profile, but if you are still attending events, business cards can still be especially fun. We get compliments on our business card all the time. It's
Yeah.
literally just a picture of us, or not a picture of us. It's like the dancing emoji on the front and our logo.
Yeah, it's the dancing emoji girls. And then, so it's our logo on the front. And then on the back side, it's QR code with the dancing emoji girls in the middle of the QR code.
Mhm.
And then they scan the QR code and it takes them to our digital
business card.
that we have.
Which is very fun.
Yeah.
It's fun to have both. Like digital business cards are great, but it's also really fun to have something to hand out and something unique that people can be like, wow, this is so cool, because that makes you stand out too, rather than just being like, follow me on Instagram.
Right. Like, yeah, my husband was very much like, wait, you don't have any of your information on your business card. They have to scan that code. And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, it's kind of an experience. And like, it's a digital world now. And he's so old school. He was like, oh no, I need my name, my phone number, my email address. I'm like, yeah, you're like everybody else. Sure.
Yeah, right.
Like we want to be a little different.
You do you. It's funny. And then I'd also say just some fun things that we've seen clients do in the wild, because this is also something that it's going to be really unique to you. So like we've worked with a local restaurant tap room here, and they actually used their submarks within their pattern and then also printed that on food paper. So that's how the food was delivered in like to-go boxes in the restaurant with their submarks and kind of patterns on that. So that was really fun. You can use your submarks on, beer cans. Like that's another client of ours that's kind of working through that too. Flyers. We worked with a party brand and they actually used it to wrap their trailer, which is awesome. So when they're lugging around their stuff all over the city, people see their brand and their submark and all of that. So that's really fun. Uniform apparel, shirts, hats, all of that. So there's so many unique ways. And I think one of the most fun parts, so if our clients work with us in this full like brand package aspect, we do 2 pieces of brand collateral with them. And the funnest part, however you say that, is ideating with you what types of brand collateral make sense. Like, is it an email? Is it some like physically printed material because you work with people in person? Is it something digital that's super fun? Like it's different every time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah. And those are the fun parts. Like building your core brand is obviously super fun, but when you take your brand and you start adding these elements in the wild, whether that's digital or print, it is so fun to see those things come to life because you've taken your brand and you are actually making it something out in the real world. And that's the exciting fun part, is seeing those things come to life.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to share some examples of main logos and then their supporting submarks in our show notes. So you guys can be sure to check that out and kind of see how they live and vibe as a family. And I think that'll start to, like, if it's something that's kind of confusing for you and you don't really understand, or if you're questioning like, oh shoot, do I need submarks? I think these examples will be really good for you to kind of see how they work together and that brand consistency.
I want to start calling them baby marks.
Baby marks? Oh my gosh, we actually should.
Mama mark and your baby mark. If that helps you remember what a submark is, then you're welcome. Awesome. And if you think I'm dumb, then that's okay too.
No, I think that's great. We're going to start calling that. We have to change our proposal.
Here's
now.
Your baby mark.
Here we go. So yeah, you might be asking yourself like, shoot, I only have one logo right now. Can I add a submark now? Should I add a submark now? I think we always say you should have submarks because why not? They're fun. They're an extension of your brand that make you a little bit more unique and help you to stand out. And if you only have a main logo right now, you can absolutely add submarks. There's no reason that you have to start all over. Like we can take the creative assets from your main logo and from your brand style guide, brand board, whatever it is that you have already solidified for your brand. And we can create those submarks to create that extension of your brand.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And we always tell people to have an open mind, because if all you have is a main logo and the rest of your brand isn't defined, sometimes having that guardrail of, okay, everything has to follow this main logo is unrealistic. So whenever we work with clients who have just one piece of their brand, we will always do exploration beyond that, because you need to see what else it could be. But ultimately, like, we will still show you an option that leverages the one that you have. So
Yeah.
I think it's having an open mind too, because your main logo isn't your brand. And we've talked about this so many times. It's not your brand. Your brand is everything that surrounds that. And so it's really important to make sure that if you do just have a main logo and you want to build on it, just to have that open mind that things can change.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
So yeah, that is everything about Submarks. I think I'm so excited for you guys to dig into the show notes. Like, seriously, go check that out, because seeing it come to life visually, like, we can talk about it all day
Right.
long.
And like talking about it is great. And like knowing the things, the ins and outs of submarks is fantastic, but it's a very visual thing. You have to see how they come to life and how they work with somebody's main logo.
Yeah. So please click on the show notes and just browse, even if you don't read any of the words, because you just listen to us, right?
Yeah, just
Scroll down, look at the images, look at how the main logo and then how the submarks come to life and how you can see their full family. And obviously, if you need help with any of your branding projects in 2024, reach out now, because we're already booking.
If you liked this episode, please be sure to share it with a friend and subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes dropping every Monday. Plus, if you haven't already, please leave us a review and don't hesitate to share any new episode ideas. We love hearing from you and creating this content for you. See you next week.